It is time for Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler.
Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I am Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host Smitty. Be sure to go follow us on all of our social medias at Around the 412. While you're listening to the show, go check out the description, whether you're on a listening platform or watching over on YouTube. We've got a Facebook link for everything custom designs. It's our friend Haley Wagner's small business. She does customized clothing for you guys. She also has recently started doing some customized tumblers, cups, mugs, sippy cups, shot glasses, all that sort of stuff. And Smitty actually just posted, if you follow him, he got a tumbler. I plan on getting one myself. It looks pretty sick. But go check that out. We have a Facebook link. You can she'll hook you up with really whatever you want. That's the name of the game. Everything custom designs. So go check that out. Also, shout out to our sponsor, Keeks Barbershop. Up in the corner, if you're watching over on YouTube, 401 Burkich Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. He's our longest sponsor. Nice classic vibe in the barber shop, and you could do walk-ins with Ashley and Tony as well. But Keek, or Christian, as some of you probably know him better as, is appointment only, so you can download the cut and schedule an appointment with Christian himself. But again, 401 Burkich Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, Pennsylvania. And also, I don't really know how to introduce this one, but we have a new sponsor, so I'll let Smitty
hold on.
that one.
I was just saying, if you're watching above Tyler, I'll throw it up there, but watch this magic about to happen if you're watching on YouTube. Bang! Game Changers. Yeah, partnering up with Game Changers. We're now an affiliate with them, so if you guys use code AT412 at checkout, they have two different sites. GameChanger.la is where you can find everything that is non-football, or Pick6.la is where you can find all their football-related tees. I'm actually rocking one right now if you're watching on YouTube. Marvin Harrison Jr. 1 week till the draft, so I figured I'd break this one out tonight. So I got like 25 of their shirts. Like, listen, I have been a huge Game Changer fan before we jumped on board with them. Yes, like pretty much half my wardrobe is Game Changer shirts. They do wrestling, baseball, football, basketball, hockey. I've gotten some from music. I got a Post Malone shirt from them as well. So they do everything. So go check them out. And again, use code AT412 for $10 off your order at checkout. Great company. Again, I've been supporting them way before they reached out to us about coming on and sponsoring the show. So Game Changers, very excited about this. And we're going to be giving 2 of their shirts away next week during the live show for the NFL draft. I know that this is the Penguins podcast, but if you guys are also fans of the Steelers, fans of football, be sure to check it out. And again, Game Changers. Oh, well, I got Penguins fans, Sid, Mario, Yager for sure are on that site. Those might be the only 3 right now. But either way, go check them out. They're sick. I'll throw Keek back up there for now. But again, very excited about that. We'll talk about them at the end of the podcast as well. I have a very energetic tone in my voice because I was so excited about the Game Changers thing. But now that we're going to get down to brass tacks and talk about the Penguins season, that's going away. They played their last game of the season, the time of recording this last night, but their season realistically ended the previous night with the Washington Capitals winning. The Detroit Red Wings also won, but that game didn't even end up mattering, which, by the way, if you're a Red Wings fan, that had to be so infuriating, like even more so than Penguins, because they took care of the Canadians coming back from in back-to-back games the way that they did, in the fashion that they did. And it didn't matter because the Flyers pulled their goalie in a tie game because they thought they had to win in regulation, even though that wouldn't have mattered anyway because of Detroit getting to at least overtime with Montreal. That would have eliminated the Flyers regardless. So, but no one passed that information along to Torts prior to them pulling the goalie. So they still did it as if they had a shot in regulation to win that game. So, yeah, really weird situation with all these teams so clumped together at the end of the season. I do tip my cap. I want to say this. I tip my cap to the effort that the Penguins showed down the stretch here. They did play really good hockey. And if there was maybe 5 more games in the season, maybe we're having a different conversation, and they are in the playoffs with the way that they played down the stretch here. But that's not how it played out. They didn't do enough prior to put themselves into that conversation. So they miss out on a top 10 pick that is still going to go to San Jose. And they also missed the playoffs. This was what we talked about. This was like the worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario.
Yeah. Now they made it fun down the stretch. Like, I'll give that to them. I enjoyed watching this. I enjoyed watching Michael Bunting, Sidney Crosby's chase pursuit, obviously, of his continued history. But yeah, ultimately it was for naught. Nothing good came of what this season did. Another cool moment. I do want to tip my cap again, Jeff Carter. We haven't necessarily talked about him super positively over the last couple of seasons, and that's not his fault. I think it was going back to the time that he was acquired. Great trade, bad extension. And I think that's probably the best way to put it. But a heck of a career. Really cool that he was able to score a goal in his last NHL game, confirmed by him immediately. I mean, we knew that was going to be the case regardless, but he immediately said that was it for him. Also, really cool by the Islanders to make him a star of the game and stay out and shake his hand and everything like that. But yeah, this episode, we're just going to kind of recap where things went wrong. And Tyler, if you remember last year, right after the season ended, we were talking about, okay, how soon can they start announcing changes that we expect them to make? I mean, realistically, if there are going to be changes made, they could come as early as like tomorrow by the time that we're recording this, by the time people are listening or watching to this.
I thought they might have came as early as today recording this. I thought that the next day you could have seen the Grim Reaper coming down the hall for some of the people in that room. I think it starts behind the bench. It has to. And whether you agree or not, if Mike Sullivan should be the head coach, I think regardless, when it comes to Vellucci and Reardon, I think both of those guys should be gone, and I think they will be gone. I think the Penguins are that organization right now. I think they're willing to get rid of those guys as opposed to Sullivan, and that's just something that I am really feeling right now. Is that the way Dubas has spoken about Sullivan this season, the way that it seems like when Fenway Sports Group came in, didn't seem like they were like eager to move on from Sullivan or showed signs that like Sullivan's seat was that hot. Granted, that also was before they missed back-to-back postseasons as well, though that could change a thing. But his extension doesn't kick in with FSG until this upcoming season. So are they going to honor that? I think they will. And the way Dubas talked about him, I think that because he was quoted with, if you don't have Mike Sullivan, you're looking for Mike Sullivan. And I get that notion, but like it's not 2016 anymore. Mike Sullivan is not the head coach that won the Stanley Cups, I don't think. And I think that is part of the reason that the Penguins are in the situation they are. I think they have had a hard time adapting to what style of hockey they should be running. At times it seemed like, especially early in the season, I think we even talked about it in an episode in like November, how it seemed as though the Penguins had kind of changed their identity over like a couple weeks. And they were playing a different style of hockey and winning some games. And we accredited that to Mike Sullivan and the way he was able to change the system. But overall, when you look at the season as the grand scheme of things as a whole, I don't think a ton of that changed. And so for me, it starts behind the bench. And if it was my opinion, I'm ready to just hack the saw at the head and get rid of all three. I think that it's time to kind of move on because they've pretty much tried to change everything they can about the organization except for the head coach over the last like several years. And so I think that eventually that time has to come. You've changed multiple GMs during Mike Sullivan's tenure, players in and out the door all the time during his tenure. At some point, the Grim Reaper is going to be calling for Mike Sullivan too. If it was up to me, it would be this offseason, and I would just try to get a clean slate. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Sullivan's going to be back, but I do think that Reardon and Vellucci are going to be gone because I feel like Dubas is going to feel the pressure, especially because you saw a resurgence from this team in the late March, early April season. You saw what they were able to do, play themselves back into a potential playoff spot several times throughout that stretch, being in a playoff spot. I think that Dubas is going to feel the pressure of, okay, this isn't the same team whenever I traded Jake Gensel as it is right now. They've shown that they are closer to maybe not being like a cup contender. I'm not going to say that, but they're closer to being a playoff contender than what they've shown. I mean, they were literally a game away from making the playoffs this season. And so maybe a little bit of retooling could do that, but something has to change when it comes to special teams, power play specifically. I don't think the penalty kill was as bad as the power play over a season-long stretch. But power play needs to change, and if personnel is not going to be the only reason to do it, coaches have to go as well. So I think that there's a lot of change that needs to happen, but the Penguins team did show a lot of fight, and I think that's probably because they started to believe in themselves again. After that, before and after that Jake Guentzel trade, I just don't think the team were really in it anymore. I don't think they were mentally in the season with that. I think it affected them, and we talked about that when it happened, but like when we referenced whenever Carl Hagelin was traded, and Carl Hagelin is not Jake Guentzel. Carl Hagelin was not as much of an impact as Jake Guentzel was in a Penguins uniform, but you saw what that did to that locker room. And so I imagine that with Jake Guentzel, it was like that 10 times fold. And whenever you were able to just like zoom the scope out and look at their schedule and results around that trade deadline, leading up to that Jake Guentzel trade, they lost 4 of the 5 games before that trade. And that was whenever Jake wasn't playing and everybody was talking about the trade. And so it was kind of looming over the team's head that it was going to happen. And then after that happened, they lost 6 out of the next 8 games post Jake Guentzel trade. And so not only was it looming over their heads, it actually happened, but now the team is sulking about it and they're depressed about it and they are just not up to play in these games. And I don't think that that's that far stretch to say that. I think that you look especially at what that did to guys like Evgeni Malkin and Sidney Crosby and Kris Letang and the stars of your team and the core of your team during that stretch post that trade. You were not getting the same production from them. And so I think it affected them heavily, Sidney Crosby especially in that stretch. And it took something like a Michael Bunting Michael Bunting, and I feel like it's kind of funny because we literally the past 4 weeks we've had just a discussion about Michael Bunting on each of our Penguin shows. But I feel like Michael Bunting was something that they needed out of that trade. They needed to rejuvenate that part of their game because they haven't had a player like Bunting, that net front presence to be able to get into those dirty areas for a while. And I think that it took something like that plus some injuries in the bottom 6 to bring up some other players that could get an opportunity. Plus some like St. Ivany and Ryan Shea in the defensive core, who I think did a great job as a bottom pairing. And then Tristan Jarry of all getting hurt and getting sick and Nedeljkovic taking over. There were a lot of things that changed the course of this team very quickly over the next couple weeks. And obviously it didn't come full circle. They didn't make the playoffs, but I think they showed enough to Dubas that there is something in this team that they could work with. There is a skeletal bones that's there. The foundation could be there to at least make it worth being in a run next season, trying this summer to make it for a run next season. Because I think if you look at where they were around that Jake Guentzel trade, if they would have stayed like those games their entire rest of the way, we're not talking about trying to retool and trying to make a run next season. We're talking about just tearing down the team and starting fresh.
The exact thing that you just said, the way that they played down the stretch, is why I believe Mike Sullivan's going to be back as the head coach. They figured it out down this. They didn't make the playoffs, but with how different they looked, I think that there is now the belief that, one off season where now you do have some other contracts that they'd clearly like to have off the books. I don't know what you do about Ryan Graves, but that's like a whole separate conversation, because that was part of what you were just talking about too, how different things looked. When you have got Jackson Ivany, restricted free agent, I'm not like saying that he's like a guy you got to pound the table for like this, but like I think when you look at who their other free agents are, he's probably a priority to bring back with what he showed on that third pairing. But yeah, there's not really been a question in my mind whether Mike Sullivan would be back. I do agree with you in terms of the other people on the coaching staff pretty much being gutted. The one question I have is Ty Hennis. Don't know fully what his role is since he was promoted from his role as just the skills coach to now being behind the bench. But with Vellucci and Reardon, I expect that they will both be gone. So I would anticipate that for sure happening. You mentioned the Michael Bunting thing and like their stretch before and their stretch after. We've talked about that. I almost feel like it was like hey, prove it. Prove to us that you are part of what we want to be. And once he did that, then everybody was able to buy in, not as like him being a Jake replacement, because there was nobody that was going to do that, but just as like a piece that could be part of this team. And once he kind of got himself acclimated and stuff, that's when they went on this run. So I do think that that's not just a coincidence. I think that is a direct result of the acquisition of him, and then him kind of having to prove himself to that locker room. But yeah, I mean, I posted this yesterday. Like, that's one of the things, like, I'm excited for a full season of Michael Bunting. And going back to the time when we traded for him, I wouldn't have imagined myself saying that. I mean, I was very vocal about how much I didn't like that trade and his inclusion in that trade. I want to ask you, and I know that you're not going to have necessarily like an answer to this, maybe just like an opinion, but like, this is something that's been talked about before, and I don't know what the reason is. How do you get to this point with a coach that has had the success that Mike Sullivan did, though? Like, I feel like he is exactly like, we've become what everybody was chasing when the Penguins were the team at the top. Like in 16 and 17, when the Penguins were at the top, everybody kind of had to like reshape the way that they were building their rosters to be able to keep up with the Penguins. And now we're on the other side of that. But like, as the team that everybody was chasing, you would think that they kind of already had the blueprint for that. So how do you fall into the cycle of what you didn't want to be? And how are we at this point?
Well, I think a lot of that is just your team ages, your team changes. In those 16 and 17 runs, especially 16, I feel like it's, if you pull most Penguins,
those were two very different teams. Yeah, just within 1 year.
Two very different teams.
Yeah.
16 was the clear-cut blueprint for not only what had the Penguins' success, but what the success of hockey was going to be over the next decade. They really changed the NHL and how it was played. It was not necessarily
nobody
a
was
slow
beating
game
that team
before.
In 7 games. There was not a chance. Yeah.
Yeah, but there was no chance anybody could keep up with them. And I think that part of that is they could have just aged out of it. And I say that, and I know that they're not necessarily like as unskilled as they were in 16. Like they're not as skilled as they were in 16, and definitely not as fast. But I think that when you look at your main contributors, like your core, I mean, 36, 37 years old, if you're not replacing wingers and people to be able to keep up with that style of play, I think that's probably where you get to the point where you are the team that you're trying not to be, or that you were trying to, that everybody was trying to catch up to. And I was relating this, talking to somebody. I think the Penguins right now are what the Chicago Blackhawks were. It's just our stars are better. And I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that is like a 100% like accurate description. But as of right now, I get the sense that we are like the 2016, 17, 18 Chicago Blackhawks, except Sidney Crosby and Evgeni Malkin are better than Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. And so our floor is a little higher than theirs was. But I don't know that our ceiling is all that higher right now. And then I think that with misconstruction of a lineup, you see what happens to the Blackhawks, and then what they are currently still in. They got Connor Bedard, but I mean, that franchise is still trying to come back from that fall off after those cup runs. I feel like it took us a little bit further to get down off of that fall, because you won the cups in 16 and 17. You were still playoff contender for years. I don't think that the fall was as harsh, but I think that they are really getting close to being that older team that had the stars, that won with the stars. They still have the stars, but the stars are getting older and the team isn't getting better around them. And I think that's part of the problems.
But and yeah, I agree. But that's my point, is like, we saw other teams while we were at the top do that. So like, we should have already had the foresight, in my opinion, like, this is what we don't want to be. So like, why weren't we able to, while getting surplus on the contract and still having these guys under market value in Sidney Crosby and Evgeni Malkin, Kris Letang, and then you bring in Karlsson, obviously, but even Jake Gensel going into the season was underpaid compared to what he was producing. Like, how weren't you able to put a better team around them to still be able to compete? Like, that's the most frustrating thing about this to me, is if you would have told me that the Penguins are going to fall off within the last couple of seasons, this is back-to-back years now not making the playoffs, but it's because of their core aging and them just not being able to produce at the same level, then I accept that. We ran this thing till we could. We ran out of gas. We squeezed it for all that we could get it for. Then okay, I can accept that. But when those guys are still playing at the levels that they are, and it's the supporting cast that isn't, supplanting that, that's why it sucks so much. And that's why it's like so tough to have these conversations, because with what you're still getting from your core, there's no reason that this playoff streak still shouldn't be alive.
Well, and that's when you got to turn the gaze over to Ron Hextall and the later years of Jim Rutherford and some of the moves that were questionable at the time and did not make your franchise better at all in the moment, and possibly could have set your franchise back, looking back at some of those moves that they made. I mean,
Kyle Dubas too. Like, Kyle Dubas is not absent of blame. Like, he went into this offseason with a ton of cap space. And again, these guys still with the contracts that are already in place. Like, he didn't have to worry about signing any of the core. That was already done. And look at what he turned that into. A 5-year deal for Tristan Jarry that we're wondering, are we going to trade him? I want to actually throw an analogy your way after we get through this conversation. But like, I think that he's absolutely a large part to blame here with the way that he the Ryan Graves deal is obviously the biggest anchor to all of this, but with really the way that he handed out these contracts within the bottom six and everything as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it seemed like there was no real direction looking back at some of those signings, because it was basically just like throwing spitballs at the wall and hoping something stuck. There was the mold was just mid bottom six player, and he signed like 9 of them. And I feel like there wasn't a huge like talent discrepancy in any of them. They were all around the same talent caliber. And honestly, some of the best players you got, like Valtteri Puustinen, was not one of those free agent signings, but he comes up and he does a nice job at the NHL level and is a consistent player in your bottom six. And maybe that will change the tune of Kyle Dubas this season. I definitely hope so. And the reason I didn't mention Kyle Dubas when I was mentioning Rutherford and Hextall is just because he had just the one season on his belt. He hasn't even been here for a year.
And the playoff streak had already been ended, obviously, last year.
Yeah, and he's not shy of blame, but he's not shy of blame for this season. But I agree. There's just too much, honestly. That's the real answer. There's too much that got to the Penguins to this point. And there's a lot of blame with the GMs. There's a lot of blame with the coach. And I understand that like Sidney Crosby's still playing at the level he is, but like Letang and Gino are aging as well. Like there's definitely things that are changing throughout this team since 2016. But I feel like, and maybe to some degree, maybe not as bad, or not nearly as bad as the Steelers, but I feel like to some degree, Mike Sullivan away has become like a Steelers coach, like where people are either going to love him and people are going to hate him, and he's going to be sticking around no matter what. And that's at least going into this offseason.
The organization in the same way.
That's the thing. Going into this offseason, I feel very similarly that I do. Was it last offseason that people were complaining about Tomlin coming back, or the season before that? It's an annual thing, so I'm not entirely sure which season I'm talking about when it comes to the Steelers. But I feel like we've kind of gotten to that point with Sullivan, where no matter what, he's going to be back. He's going to be the head coach on night 1 of the opening of the 2024 season. And people are going to love that, or people are going to hate that, but that's just the reality of it. Things are going to change around him, but he's going to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm in full agreement with that, obviously. I said I want to throw an analogy your way. The Tristan Jarry situation, I know the contracts are very different, but man, I can't help but think about Kenny Pickett with the Steelers in the way that played out. Like, if they don't trust him enough to throw him into the last game of the season when it means absolutely nothing over Alex Nedeljkovic, who just played 12 straight games for them, I like, they can say whatever they want. I think that's pretty damning as to how they feel about him as the starting goaltender going forward.
I think so too. I thought that was the nail in the coffin. If you're not going to bring him back, considering that he came back in a game, you saw him play recently. Not that he played well or anything to against Boston, but I think that in a game where it's the last game of the season and nothing matters in this game, you would have gone back to what was your season-long starting goalie. They don't do that, and to me, that's kind of like writing on the wall that maybe not. It might not be easy, and I might not be quick, but at some point, like the Dubas and the Penguins are going to look to move Tristan Jarry this offseason. We've said it several times. I've said it several times that last season I don't think they wanted Jarry. I think they were kind of just cornered into a wall with the goalies that were dealt to them, and they took the best of a bad bunch. And the contract is bad, and I think that they definitely want to move on. And when you look at the future of goaltending, and I didn't even know if we were going to have this conversation, one of the first things I would do,
we brought this up a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, one of the first things I would do is actually the first thing I would do, coaches. That's where I start. But one of the first thing player personnel wise I'm looking at is I'm looking at moving on from Tristan Jarry, because not only is that going to be easier, in my opinion, than someone like Ryan Graves, just because of the positional value that Tristan Jarry brings as opposed to Graves. Like, it's
I don't think he's untradeable. Like, if they want to do it, I think they'll find a partner.
I think that Jarry is easier to trade than most people would probably think. And I think that you got to look at the contract itself, and that's the reason why. But when you try to move on from Jarry, bring back Ned on like a 1 to 2 year deal, 2 years max, but preferably like 1 to 2 years. And then you bring up Joel Blomqvist, and that is your goalie tandem, and you're getting Blomqvist ready to become the starter. He was also named to the All AHL rookie team as well for goaltenders, Joel Blomqvist. So that's what I'd do as a future for the goaltender. Joel Blomqvist would be the future starter for this franchise, and Ned would be your stopgap starter. Obviously, takes two to tango. You got to find a suitor for Jarry. You got to be able to convince Ned to come back. Maybe another team is going to shell out more money for Ned because of the performance that he had, especially late in this season. So it's going to be easier said than done, but I do think that that's the direction I would move in. And I'll save a lot of the other moves for different shows. We're going to have a lot of Penguins episodes to talk about where there's not a lot of Penguins hockey talking about because the season's over. But man, that's the first thing I would do. And then since you brought up goaltending, so what are your thoughts on it? Is you pretty much in the same boat that I am, that you're just like looking to move on from Jarry? And again, it's nothing against Jarry. Like, he didn't give himself the contract, but like that contract's just got to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's the thing. Like, we keep talking about them being backed into that and everything like that, but it's like 5 years. You give a guy 5 years for what you're backed into. Like, that's just wild to me if that's what they settled on. I'm in full agreement with trying to trade Tristan Jarry. I'm also in full agreement with getting Joel Blomqvist's feet wet as like a 1B/backup next year. If Alex Nedeljkovic is who they decide to roll with, I would be okay with that, but I'm not like 100% locking that in right now. I would be kind of looking at the free agent market. We mentioned this name last year. They only signed him to a 1 year deal, so he's once again hitting. It's probably restricted free agency again, I believe. Jeremy Swayman, though, is going to have. Are they going to give him another payday? Like, him and Linus Ullmark has been really interesting to me to continue watching that. Looking at every other goaltender, I don't know that I'm like super interesting. Like, the top goaltenders, like Carter Hart, who is also an RFA, but I don't know that I'm super interested in that anyway. Chris Streeter, Casey DeSmith, Laurent Brissois, James Reimer, who's 36 now. That's insane. Rant is 35. Like, there's not a lot out there in terms of the goaltending. Cam Talbot actually had a nice year, but he's also 36. I don't know that there's a lot of, in terms of their cap hit this past season, he's at the top, but that will not remain that way. So like Ned, maybe, like, I would have him as a placeholder guy for now, but I would explore some other options as well. I'm also not against, like, I'm curious to see if, I know that they're going to be on the other end of a trade potentially with Tristan Jarry. Would they also be looking at as being buyers in the trade market for goaltenders? Not a lot of people are trading goalies, obviously, but like, it's very convoluted and it's hard to like say, okay, we're buying and selling at the same position. But I wonder what else is out there. Long story short, what I'm saying is I'm not locked into Alex Nedeljkovic as being the 1A next year in goal. I do appreciate what he did for most of this with most of his play down the stretch, but I also think what he did in like the latter portion of this stretch is exactly why he's been just a better backup than a guy that takes the load like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. It's a lot for Dubas to have to figure out. That's really where we're at.
That's why he's look at the responsibility that he's been given. That's why he is the GM and president of hockey operations. He's going to be shouldering a lot of this. So interesting offseason coming up. We said the same last year, but when you miss the playoffs back-to-back seasons, you're talking about an ownership group that I'm sure didn't sign up for this. So I'm curious to see what the patience level is going to be. And again, a core that's still 82 games, by the way, again, from Crosby, Gino. Did Letang also play 82?
I'm not sure. Give me 1 second. I'll be able to tell you. Yeah, I mean, being able to get that many games out of your guys, yeah, he did play 82. So he played in every game.
Insane. They had a bunch of Iron Men this year, and it didn't matter.
Shout out to Sid, by the way, for tying
81 for Bunting. Karlsson also played 82. Eller played 82. Pettersson played 82.
Sid tied Teemu Selanne for the most points as a 36-year-old in the hockey or in the NHL, and he scored 94, I believe, was his last total. Yeah, 94 points, 42 goals, 52 assists. Team leader in both categories. I feel like preseason assists and points, I feel like, is probably the more obvious one. Neither of us probably picked Sid for goals. I don't think either of us did.
I don't want to say who I picked for mine.
Yeah, I know who you picked for yours. I'm pretty sure I picked Brian Rust, actually.
Really? Okay.
I'm trying to think of who I did.
How many did my guy finish with?
Did he hit 20?
No. Remember last week I thought I said that he did.
I think he might have hit 19. I think his goal in their last game was 19.
Are you serious?
I think.
No, 15.
15. Okay, never mind.
We're talking about Rickard Rakell, by the way.
Yeah, Ricky Rex.
Which is, by the way, that's going to be an interesting one to watch, in my opinion, too.
Rickard Rakell had almost as many points as Smitty predicted goals. So if that goes to tell you anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also, I don't know if we have much to talk about left, but just want to give a shout out to Jeff Carter on a great career. Last game of the season, which I don't know if, like, going into that game, I don't think anybody was really thinking about, like, Jeff Carter. This could be his last hockey game, but from
I was thinking about
the time I wasn't really thinking about it, to be completely honest. But from the time I turned on the game, it was very evident that, okay, this is Jeff Carter's last game.
Started on Sid's line. Yeah.
Started the opening faceoff. Sid was on the wing.
Yeah.
Was on the top power play late in the game, scored a power play goal in his very last game. Also very nice of the Islanders to give him a handshake line just by himself afterwards, showing the appreciation of the players for him. Great career. I mean, it is as much of a polarizing player he was over the last, like, 2 seasons. His first season and season and a half as a Penguin was great. It was up until that contract extension that everybody had the fuss about him. But prior to that, I thought he was a great player for the Penguins. And obviously it seems like they like him a lot. So I'm sure he's probably going to be sticking around in some capacity with the organization if he wants to. It seems like he's going to be sticking around in Pittsburgh. So awesome trade when it happened. I remember the absolute electric, 9 goals in 14 games of Jeff Carter, and he was great.
I thought you were going to say the awesome reaction by Danny Shirey to the trade.
Oh, yeah, the awesome reaction of going back to bed. Well, Danny Shirey can go back to bed now because Jeff Carter is retired.
Jeff Carter can also go to bed and rest well, knowing that he had over 850 career points in the NHL, 2-time Stanley Cup champion. Would have been great to see that third one, get one as a Penguin, but it didn't happen. Go be a family man. Obviously, it was awesome that he was able to play long enough for his kids to get to a point where they actually know what's going on. That's also rare to have that type of longevity. So great career. Finishes out in Pittsburgh. I don't think I got anything else. One last shout out to Jeff Carter.
Just fun fact, just because of something you just mentioned, is that whenever Mario retired the first time and he came back in 2000. Part of the reason for coming back was not only did he feel good, but he wanted his son Austin to be able to see him play hockey and know what he's actually watching.
Yeah. Yep. That's got to be so cool. So, yeah, big shout out to Jeff Carter and the Carter family. Go enjoy the life after hockey. And again, like Tyler mentioned, by the sounds of it, maybe in a year or two after taking some time with his family, he'll be back in the organization in some capacity. So, be cool to see. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here. Go check out the description of the show, whether you are watching or listening, doesn't matter where. It will have the link to our friend Haley, Everything Custom Designs, her small business. She just did a Tumblr for me. I meant to bring it down here, but I did not. So I'll go grab it before you guys watch the Pirates or Steelers episode so you can see what it looks like. But yeah, she does that, t-shirts, hoodies, a bunch of different custom stuff, just not hats, basically at this point. Everything else she can do. So again, Everything Custom Designs, our friend Haley Wagner's small business. Right above Tyler, you see a logo that is for Keats Barbershop, located at 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Our friend Christian Circle, along with Tony and Ashley. Download the app The Cut to book an appointment with Christian, or they do walk-ins. Tony and Ashley both do walk-ins. Again, Keats Barbershop, 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. And then as you can see right now, scrolling across the bottom, if you use code AT412 at gamechanger.la or pick6.la, you will get $10 off your order, whatever that might be. I'm rocking Marvin Harrison right now, 1 week until the NFL draft. So again, gamechanger.la or pick6.la. You get $10 off your order there. Big shout out to Game Changers. That just happened. So yes, this is the first episode where you are hearing us promote that. Other than that, for Tyler, for Smitty, this has been the Around the 412 Penguin Show. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.